Pre-check, pre-flight check seems to have uh, been successful. Everything seems to be working. Microphone bars are popping. Hello, fellow Sublime Text Fanatics. OdatNurd here. Welcome to the Sublime Text live coding live stream for September 24th, 2019. And we're going to continue working on the stuff that we were working in the last stream. And before we get into that, I guess I should also point out that if you like these videos and you watch them live or you watch the or replay later, use those buttons down below to thumb subscribe and share them with anybody that you think might find of interest. And if you like more short, focused, topical videos, I have another channel which is linked down in the description of these live stream videos. You can hop on over there every Monday at 9 a.m. Pacific. A new Sublime Text video drops. And if you have a suggestion for a video in that series, if there's a topic on Sublime Text that you would like me to cover in a video, you can drop those down in the comment section on any of my videos or tweet me a video suggestion at OdatNurd and we'll see what we can do. There may be some topics that I can't quite answer. For example, someone asked me once about how to set up a specific programming language to use in Sublime, and that's not something I can help with to a large degree because that's not a language I'm familiar with, and I don't know how to what the best method for setting that sort of thing up would be. But you never know. I can try to provide as much guidance as is possible. So please do drop those suggestions down in there if you have an idea for something that you'd like me to see. And I do Sublime videos of all varieties. Those videos are tending to be more technical how Sublime works and less how to write plugins as we do over on this channel in the live stream. But I do have plans to do more videos of that sort in a longer form on the other channel. So if you have any specific plugin package development topics, that would go well as well. But we are here and we are working on what will be the next build of Override Audit version 2.1.1 when the time comes, which I could have swore that I added a changelog entry for this thing when I fiddled with it. Oh, that's right. I jumped out of that branch, didn't I? I jumped out of that branch. That's right. That's in this branch that changelog is there. 2.1.1 is going to have this bug fix in which the new functionality from the most recent release of Override Audit is the ability for you to view and override by, say, picking something like this and picking the default. I have a paste from history override. Because of that and the settings I have set up, I can jump between how my override is different from the underlying package file and see what the diff hunks are and revert them if need be and whatnot. And there was a slight bug in that if you quit Sublime and restart, the diff isn't reapplied unless you close and reopen the file. So I fixed that, and I did say in the last stream that we were going to maybe push that release out tonight if no other bug fixes reared their ugly head or nothing else was reported. And nothing was technically reported, but I'm going to hold off on that at least for another week in relation to what we'll be working on tonight, which if you watch the previous live stream, will know we're working on the ability to do something like this, where we could make our overrides to a particular package, adding files such as this one, deleting files such as this one, or just modifying content like this. And this is a standard. I used diff, this command right here, as a matter of fact, on an extracted version of the package. that I modified against another unmodified extracted version of the package to get this file. And this is a standard unified diff format file. And the idea is we'd be able to say right click on one of these packages and say create patch for, as we see that it's something that we sort of worked on in the previous video, and it would create one of these files like so, and then we could save this, ship it off in the forum to another person, send it in an email, post it in a gist, put it on Stack Overflow, anything like that, and a person could just come in and right click on it and pick apply patch, and it'll take all of the patches of this and apply them as overrides in that person's package thing. So this is something that I think should be quite useful for a variety of people, both power users that just want to share these sorts of things around, as well as for doing things like we do a lot in Stack Overflow and in the forum for Sublime, where someone might ask a question and it's a simple thing like you need to modify this file in this way, but you have to provide so many instructions for here's what you're going to have to do to be able to open that file. You might be using a different version of Sublime. You got to scan down, you got to find the right location. You want to make this change like this and then save the file. You could use package resource viewer to do that. You could use override audit to do that. Once you do this, you're creating an override. So now it's a whole thing to make sure that you keep abreast of package updates because Sublime won't tell you. And it's a thing that, imagine if you could say this is totally a bug. Someone has a problem with the HTML syntax, for example, in the current release of Sublime, and we can say that's actually a bug in the HTML syntax. It was fixed in the GitHub repository for this a couple of weeks ago. You're not going to be able to see it until the next release, but until that time, if you install override audit, save this file, right click, click apply patch, it is going to apply that fix for you. And because you have to have override audit to do that, override audit will tell you when the override may no longer be necessary. Streamlines that whole process and make things a whole lot easier. And that's what the next set of features is going to be. And I think that might be 2.2 as a build. And now we are working on 2.1 right now. And then specifically the next build would be a minor patch revision 2.1.1, fixing that diff bug there. But there's a couple other things that I thought I might stick in there. And it was something that hadn't really occurred to me prior to what we were working on in the last stream and my own investigations in creating this file here to see. I modified some of it. All of the diff chunks used to have this, but I was sort of fiddling with the idea of each one of the unified diff format allows you to have lines above each one of these diff chunks that normally it's the command like you see here. If you do this for Git, there's a couple of lines in there that tells you the index is involved and stuff. If you do it in Subversion, SVN diff generates even more information than that. And what we'd like is information for what package was being diffed against and what its version was so that we can provide some sort of warning. So I was just sort of playing around with that. But as a part of that, and this is something that I knew in the murky distant past, is that in these headers here, this is the left file, the source file, if you will, and this is the destination file, the file that would be created if you created the patch. And in this particular case, we can see based on the fact that this timestamp is the Linux epoch and that it's supposed to be an empty file, that this is delete. But you should be able to determine what the name of the file is by examining this. It should go one of these three characters, then the relative name of the file. How that works depends on how you generated the patch, of course, and then the date and time of the thing. And it's possible for file names to have dates in them if you want them to, and it's possible for file names to have spaces in them if you want them to. So the unified diff format actually uses, if we can see here, physical tab characters to separate the file name from the date, which is an important consideration for a diff because we can see here that in the actual source file, the lines that were removed were actually physical tabs. And this is something that I've had a problem with for a long time. I might create an override. I think I've fixed them all now. I'm not sure. Let's take a look at one of these and see. Is there actually any changes in this? No, there aren't, are there? That's probably a file I just created for another reason. This miscellaneous preferences is one that I just recently fiddled with. Maybe this one. I can't remember. I think I fixed them all. Okay, now see, here's something that if I was to, and I'm not sure, this might be shell command make, shell command make. These two lines are both the same as far as this is concerned. But you can see here that spaces, and this is a tab. So tabs are unique in diffs, and this particular problem here is an artifact of using package resource viewer to create an override. And this is one of the reasons why we created our own command for it. Because when you use the override audits create override command like this, and you choose a file like, say, this, it actually uses, as we can see here, Sublime's internal function for opening a file. And that means that if there were tabs in this file, there are still tabs in this file no matter what, because it just opens the file. There is a setting, translate tabs to spaces, which makes Sublime, when you insert text, if you insert a tab, the tab is expanded to the correct number of spaces, right? Now, package resource viewer, if we did the same thing, see if I can actually choose the correct thing. If I picked open resource and this syntax, notice that the mini diff shows that this entire file is changed. And the reason for that is, we can see here, if I look in this menu, undo insert content, if I do that, I end up with an empty buffer. Package resource viewer does this by using an internal Sublime API function to load this file and paste it in and insert it into the buffer. And as a result, any tabs in this get converted to spaces. And you end up with things like this override that just seem to work all weird for you. Like this part down here, I definitely just added that myself. There was only one variant there, and I added a second one. But again, that's that whole issue with tabs versus spaces, right? So if I was to toggle that and toggle this, whoops, now I did that the wrong way. I forgot there's more than one there, isn't there? Yeah. If I was to go over to here and say spaces convert indentation to tabs and save the file, now the diff is way nicer. Now I know exactly what it was that I actually changed here. I changed the working directory because it used to be, for projects that I work in, this was always finding the wrong one, because we have at work we use make a lot, and each directory has its own make. But the way that this was working out, it was sometimes picking the folder one. It was going too far, so I tweaked it up a little bit for my own uses, and also I added that run variant there. We can see this diff is way easier to understand than what the other one was. And when we look at them, we can actually literally see that the only difference there is this part. These parts are still the same. So tabs are important in diffs. And I found this eminently interesting, and this is something that I was thinking about since the other day when I did the video on configuring Sublime. Because if we use view package file and use make file settings like so, in a make file, it's important that all the rules be indented with physical tab characters, because make is finicky, for lack of a better term. If you indent rules in a make file with spaces, it says missing separator, stop, and if you're not a make guru and you're new to make, you wonder what the hell it's trying to tell you. So the syntax that ships with make has translate tabs to spaces forced to be false for make files, and detect indentation is also set to true to make for sure that when you open a make file, it does as correct a thing as possible in detecting how the indentation in the file should work, and that tab shouldn't immediately be swapped with spaces if you happen to prefer working that way, which I personally do. This is a good thing to have, but you might note if I look at diff settings, there's only my user settings where I turned word wrap off. Diff should have these same settings, or at least it should have translate tabs to spaces false, because the diff syntax that's used by Sublime, and maybe we can actually even test this out here. I was fiddling with it earlier. If I said that this should not indent using spaces and the tab size was 4, then I could say 1, 2, 3, 4, like this. And we can see that's all indented with tabs, including that line. I'm going to save this, and I'll save it in my this directory is crunk.txt, for example. Okay, now I'm going to close that tab. I'm going to reopen it. I'm going to change this to 2.5. And if I right-click on this and choose Show Unsaved Changes, this panel opens up. And what's different in the file is that line. Yes, correct. That line is different. But these lines of context have tabs now. They don't have spaces. They say they have spaces now. They don't have tabs like they should. And this is showing spaces and not tabs. And up here, between the name of the file and the date, is a space. We can see it's not a tab. It's a dot there, right? If I was to do that same thing again, and say diff settings like this, copy these. Probably only translate tabs to spaces is technically needed for this. If I was to paste that in here like this, so now that's my own specific diff settings, and I show unsaved changes. Now there's tabs in here. You can see in the space between here, there's a tab. That's what we want. This is a valid diff. This is how that's supposed to work. Here, yes, that line used to be indented with a tab and 2, and now it's indented with a tab and 2.5. And this is important because you might want to copy this, save it. As a matter of fact, this doesn't work, I would imagine, right? Yeah, it's going to try to save the text file. But if it was in a panel up here, you might want to save this as a patch file and run the Unix patch command on it. You'll change your file otherwise, and it might even fail. Because the diff context lines have spaces instead of tabs. I haven't actually tested that, but I assume that would be the case. So what I'm thinking is, I'll go ahead and delete that file now. Yeah, you can close that without saving. I'm okay with that. I think what we want to do, and I think I already have done a little bit of this, and this is a thing that I'm thinking is going to be part of 2.1.1 just to sort of get it ready. As part of the syntax definition cleanup, you'll note that this is something we did last stream real quickly. In the name of all of the syntaxes are more specific now, so we can see override report, package report, and diff report, so that when you're in one of these things, do I have one of those around here? If you're in a package report, it says override audit package report down here and not just override audit, which, I mean, it is an override audit thing. You might want to know that it's a distinct kind of file if you have more than one thing. So that seemed like a good idea to me. And, the functionality for doing this, hit Alt-O and open a diff, is using the syntax for diff, the just built-in syntax. There's nothing special about this. I'm doing the exact same thing to create this that Sublime is using when you use that thing I was just using when you pick show unsaved changes, which I can't do here because this isn't the file that was on disk, and this one doesn't have any unsaved changes. But I'm doing the exact same thing that is doing to generate these diffs. So it's using that syntax. That diff syntax should, I think, have those settings, and it doesn't. And similarly, if you were to do a bulk diff of a single package, say the default package, there's that. And Well, maybe this one might be a little better one. Bulk diff all packages like so. Oops. I'm going to zoom that out. And we can see here, this is the reason why I created that override. Because in the diff for comments.tm preferences, if you were just curious what changed in the file, you could do this. I mean, if we edited this as well, we can see that same line there if you were curious. But if you actually wanted to do something about this, like copy it out and paste it or whatever, you want to have these tabs here. And this is working now because of this over here. There used to be just a setting that turns word wrap off by default in diff reports. So if you're diffing a really wide file, the diff doesn't look all wonky. I've included those diff settings right in here so that this works. And I believe this is what we want to do. I want to ponder on that just a little bit more before I commit to actually releasing it, which is why we're not doing a release tonight. But that's sort of my thinking on that idea. And for the purposes of this, this is our own syntax that matches, as we can see here. It just inserts whatever the diff syntax. And I wonder why it's source and not text is something interesting. Because another thing that we could do, this syntax is pretty pretty tiny, all things considered, for the amount of rules that it has. It's really weird that it's source.diff, to be perfectly honest. Um, but so we could inline this instead of doing a main here if we really wanted to. Um, I have inlined this in the diff report syntax. I inlined these rules because all of these rules for like this stuff require that the pattern match at the start of the line, which makes sense. You know, this is at the start of the line is special. That at the start of the line is special, but a line that just has spaces in the middle isn't. For example, I guess I'd have to say this to be able to edit this. But if we modify this, that's not special anymore. Now it's just a context line. So those have to be in the start column. So for the diff report, I actually inlined these rules so that I could say that all the rules that start with this actually start with exactly as much indent as you would expect the diff to have, which is exactly 8 spaces because of the way I generate this. I don't generate this with tabs. I generate this specifically with spaces like so. So all the diff rules and the syntax I have this hard coded to be anything that starts with that, and then everything else can be diff content if it wants to be. For these lines, it does not make much of a difference, but for these, it does. And that's why, as far as the diff is concerned, that's why that's working the way that it is, and why it's possible to do this and end up with this weird mixed indentation business here that generally makes me feel all creepy. So I'm thinking add that patch in and also have this syntax ready to rock and roll as well and put it in there and use it instead of the diff syntax for that other functionality. Um, and in which case we would need to merge those changes over to the other branch just to have it ready to go because I think it's a bug that it's not doing this, and I think it's definitely a bug that it's not doing it in here by default. I mean, this is obviously a bad file for that. I should be using that. I should be using this file over here is what I should be using. So maybe I could just close that and go ahead and open this file instead. If I'm going to have an example of it, because this has tabs in it. So you could go like this and say, yeah, that has tabs in it. That's what we want. And it only has tabs in it because I modified my own diff settings. So I think instead of saying diff, we should have our own syntax here for this, which is where this comes in again. And I guess what I'm wondering at this point is, should it be named override audit patch? Should it be renamed override audit diff? Should it be override audit diff patch? Does it even matter? I'm not entirely sure, to be perfectly honest. How about that as a thing? We'd have to actually apply this to something. This is actually a new file, right? Yeah. We could rename it to OA diff patch like this, just because. And then we could save as this to OA diff patch.sublime settings. Have those same settings in it so that those will automatically apply. Now, if we came back to, well, we'll close that for a second. That's pretty easy to open. We don't care about that. A little bit of a window overload going on here. That's an example of a thing as well. Okay, so that's nice. That's nice. That's, well, I guess we probably should have kept that file, huh? Let's close. Let's jump that over here for the time being. Really got to clean some stuff up here, but I had a lot of stuff open. We'll close that. That's our syntax. That's our diff report. We don't care about that for the time being. We don't care about that or that, or we'll leave that one open because that's a method to apply a unified diff. I don't think that's the version I'm going to ultimately go with. I think it should be a little more intelligent than that. But we need to swap the syntax used for diffing things, because the idea is, I have to swap back to this and close this. When we do this, we should end up with something that says override audit diff patch. So we're using our own syntax. And oh yeah, that's what I was going to do. I was going to syntax specific settings this and comment both of those out just for the time being, like so, and close that up so that now if I do this, that looks that way, which is quote unquote wrong. So we'll be able to doubly check that this is doing what we want it to do. And we would pop over to, that's diff override, that's a single thing, right? Yeah, and we would jump to the item in the core that does that. Open override. Here's the output to view, and we would use OA syntax, OA diff patch. I can't remember if I need to provide this, whoops, the extension on that or not. I think not, but we'll see. No, I don't. Okay, good. So if I do that and reload this, in the world of the 100% theoretical, it's now override audit diff / patch, but the settings don't apply. That's interesting. I would have thought for sure those settings would apply. Oh, Nert's doodle. I mean, it worked when it was a diff, so it would have to work for this too, right? I mean, that just stands to reason. Unless something untoward happens as part of the, no, that's, did I fully reload this whole thing? Yes, okay, so, yeah. That must have worked because we saw it there, so. I do that, we see that, and I must have named that file wrong. I would wager. OA-diff patch. It seems like it should be the thing. Translate tabs to spaces. Well, it's clearly not doing anything, I'll say that. When in doubt, quit it out. That's a saying, right? I may have just made it up myself. Gotta close that and, all right, boom. There we go. That's right. When you newly create a Sublime settings file, it doesn't necessarily get loaded. I think you can kickstart it by manually trying to load it. It's a long-standing double finger quote bug in Sublime that is the case. I think if it was part of a package that was ignored and then unignored, like when package control installs a package, then as part of scanning the package, it would find them. But when it's already scanned thing, there are some. It undoubtedly knows that settings file is there, but it doesn't load it and apply it. So that is working for us dandylicious. And I think that's more or less what we would want out of that particular change. So now our diffs are otherwise identical to what they used to be. But now we have this going on instead. Now, what might also be nice here, and I don't know if this is something that we'd want to do right now, in theory, this should be usable as input into our eventual command, which we're going to talk about in just a moment. Maybe I'll take a sip of some of my fine, fine coffee first. Um, but if instead of saying diff of AppleScript comments TM preferences, if it sent something like comments.tm preferences.oa patch instead, then you could save it and give it an appropriate name, and it would work. That might be something I kind of don't like that. I was gonna investigate if there's a way to fiddle um, that. We might actually try that. There's a ridiculously hacky thing. I'm pretty sure the name that it uses in the dialog box is based on the name that it's been given, which is the name of the tab, which is why that's what we see when that pops up there. Um, there might be a sample plugin we can look in for that. But before we do anything else, before I forget anything, diff syntax. We want maybe a first line match. Apart from the fact that we're naming this thing OA patch, which is just to make it distinct from patch scope wise, so that we have our own name for that. And so that we can better determine when you right click in it that you should be able to um, apply this patch. This actually shouldn't say create patch. It shouldn't say this. It could say this for a diff, I guess. That's something to consider. If you already have a diff, you already have a patch for it. You don't need to have that. You could just save it as a patch for, and then it could just save the file for you and open it in a tab or something along those lines. That's something to worry about in a minute. But if this was something that could be applied as a patch, you might want to pick it. I suppose you wouldn't want to apply this as a patch because you don't need to, because it's already a read-only version of the thing, right? So there could be more stuff to be happening there. I think, and we have to come back over to here. We want this to be syn OA patch like this, so that it knows that that's what this is. And we're going to actually delete this file, send it to trash. We're going to cancel. We don't want to close the file in this particular case, but we want to save as it to sample.oa patch like this. So now if I close that and reopen it, it automatically gets assigned that because of the extension of the file. Now, this is something that I'm kind of pondering. This line here is something that the diff command injected or spat out when I ran the diff minus RU capital N, which is recurse create unified diff and treat non-existent missing files as empty, which is what allows it to do stuff like this. Tell you that this file was added and this file was deleted. Um, it generates those to show you what was used to generate it. As I said, various diff things do a similar thing. For example, if I came back over to here and found an appropriate thing and said get diff, you can see it says diff get and the two items, and then it also has what the indexes and the file mode were before it has the actual stuff. And in this case, the file names aren't necessarily valid, but Git knows how to parse this whole thing. So we could have theoretically any sort of lines there that we want. I did some checking. I was unable to determine. There's, the nice thing about standards is there's so many of them. But of all things, I was sort of pondering what could we put here that's informative enough to tell you what this diff chunk represents, while at the same time being something that could be detected as the first line of the syntax. And I thought maybe OA diff minus package this minus version, I guess it would be, minus package equals package dev minus version equals 3.2.1, like this. Maybe we don't need the time that the patch was created or the person that was creating it. That's something I was pondering, but maybe not. If this was an example of how this might work, and here's an example of the same thing. This would say OA diff package equals default version equals 3210. And that's it. This would tell us that this was something that came out of Sublime Text 3210, so we wouldn't need to know that there. And another another example of that would be OA diff package equals ASP version equals unknown, like this. This is just sort of a, and I'm not sure. This seems like a good idea to me. When we create one of these patches, what we probably want to know is, as we can see here, that I created this out of package dev. Not really. This is ASP, but I'm just sort of working on that stuff. I don't have anything to generate these manually yet, or automatically, I should say. I have to do it manually. Let's say we want to know what the name of the package was, even though that's technically available here, and we want to know the version of the package that was installed that the override was made for. And more or less, we really only need the version, and technically we don't actually even need that either. But my thinking is, if we were to take this patch and try to apply it, override audit could say, just so you know, this patch was prepared for package dev version 3.2.11, but you're running package dev version 3.2.19. So your version is newer. I can still try to apply the patch. It'll probably work, but it's sort of that, things might have changed. Maybe you don't want to apply this patch. Maybe it needs to be, you could say like, yeah, no, I know what I'm doing, apply it anyway, but it can provide that information for you. And it doesn't really need to know that it's package dev, because the items that we're saving here would actually have that information in them already if we cared. And I think we're going to be parsing these headers to know exactly what this thing is named. So much like over here, this knows that the file came from shipped packages for this. It could also say installed packages if it was something like package resource viewer. That was the thing. If I did this, see, it says installed packages there, and the source file was packages this. So that's a nice indication for us that this was a shipped version or an installed version. So we don't really need to know the that part there, but it seems like it would be nice just to see it there. And again, to provide that context for being able to say, are you sure you want to do this? And it would work, I think, just as well if you wanted to remove those lines. That's fine. For example, I don't think that necessarily needs to be there. Turns out after this at, you could put any optional stuff you want here. So you could actually add a little comment that says what this change is supposed to be for, like add empty settings like this. We could actually even say that if that was the case, if you wanted to annotate this as it applied the patch in a little panel on the bottom of the screen, it could show you the diff hunks that it was applying or something. Seems like a good plan. So that's sort of my thinking on that. I've got way too many windows here now. That's the full override audit window. Okay. So this would be the one where I think what we want is something like this. I'm gonna steal this line wholesale, but I'm going to do this. So that if this file was saved as sample.crunk, for example, and I closed it and reopened it, it still gets applied with that syntax, even though because of this. And the reason I want to do that is just specifically for that whole, if you wanted to copy this and drop it into a forum post, you could annotate it to say that it should be syntax highlighted as a diff, copy this file, save it, open it in Sublime, right click on it, choose, apply thing, and away it goes, right? So it's easier if you don't have to say save this file as a file that has to have an extension of .oa patch, otherwise it's not going to work. Just say save this file and open it. Doesn't matter what they save it as. They can save it as a text file if they want, because the line starts with something that we recognize, the very first line of the file, then it will be recognized and we're good to go. So that's sort of why I want to do that. And I there might be more than one. Actually, maybe we don't even necessarily need to do it that way, because this has various lines that it could have. This is how it knows to be able to know if the file is like a git diff in a variety of formats, or a subversion diff sort of thing, which I can't show because I don't have my subversion server set up at the moment. I switched everything over to Git. Maybe we want to have more than one of these. I mean, well, maybe it's going to bother me if I don't. We can always go ahead and throw that in, right? Let's go ahead and see if I just broke it by doing that. Nope, I didn't. That seems to be okay. So this is the most simplistic item of its kind that a person might expect. I could actually also gank the. This is a neat thing, right? The only context that I have in here are the source.diff. So if I really wanted to, I could say syntax test.diff. If I plomped this file down in my package and changed this part as appropriate, then I could test my own syntax just as well as I'm testing this, right? So I don't know that that's necessary at the moment. Hey, look, there's more than one way to show additions and deletions. I personally am preferring the unified diff for my own purposes. I could do that. I could also assume that because this is a shipped package and I'm embedding it, the syntax probably works. And I would add my own syntax tests if I add any more rules to this. But at the moment, I don't plan on adding my own rules to this. Unless it was to add some sort of different scope to like for this bit here. You can add any optional text you want here. Any diff tool should know that it goes at something at and everything after that don't matter on that line. So, maybe there's some way to style this slightly differently. I don't think there's a scope that's going to be helpful for that per se in a standard color scheme, but something we could consider if we wanted to. So I'm going to close without saving. This is one of those live streams where we're not really going to get a ton done. Expect that this whole operation is going to play itself out over the next X live streams, and X is probably depends on how much time I get to work on this sort of thing. And as we can see here, I played with this stuff a little bit on my own. Close that because we don't need it anymore. I still want to keep that. Well, maybe we want to open sample.oa patch instead for this and delete this one now that we know it works. Like so, we can close that as well. This is just sort of a little window that I was fiddling with stuff inside of. So we can get rid of that and get rid of that. Get rid of that. Yeah, that was always going to be that way, wasn't it? And what's this? Oh, yeah, a thing that I popped to play with it. This part's still very much, in a state of flux. This isn't something that would be injected as part of a regular diff for the purposes of diffing an override or anything. So if we came over here, we're in patch file. See, now this is theoretically something that should maybe be in patches 210, but we'll see how it goes. What do we have here for unstaged changes? Let's see. Well, a lot of those are not anything we are interested in. We have settings for diff patch, and we have this. So stage that, context menu. Oh, I probably should have, yeah. This needs to change. And let's add this one as well, because it's doing the same thing. Oh, actually, you know what? Let's not do that. Let us unstage. Don't discard all. That's not cool. I don't want to discard these changes, bub. Oh, I guess I got to be down in the staged part. Right. That's how infrequently I do that. The last commit that I did was this. Syntax for diff reports has been changed. Okay, so let's us jump into this and stage that and amend the previous commit and then go back to the previous commit. Also added settings for the diff report syntax that turn off the I can actually do this way. Translate tabs to spaces. Oh, don't do it that way. When I get in the huff, I can't remember the key binding for going back a word at a time, or partial words at a time, I should say. It really seems like something I should be able to. Oh, maybe that doesn't work the way I expected to anyway. Yeah, never mind. I got a little off base there. I wonder what that just did. I may have fiddled stuff around too much. What happens if I do this? Yeah, okay. We also added settings to the report to make sure that translate tabs to spaces is turned off in report by default so that the diffs accurately can spell show file content. Nice. Okay, now for this one, this is where we would say we have added a new syntax, diff patch. We have added settings for it. And in the core, when we do a diff, we need to stage that as well. And for the commit message for that, we would say add new syntax for diffs and patches. This adds our own new, I'm going to actually type in a full commit message here just in case I decide I want to merge this stuff in. I don't want to try and merge stuff, or if I decide not to merge it, I should say. Adds our own new syntax for diffs and eventually patches that embeds the, well, I guess it technically includes the shipped diff syntax for the main rules and applies our own name extension and wish I could type and first line match. This is now used for our own diff views. In addition to the syntax, we also have default settings that ensure that and this is where I'm not sure that the detect indentation true is technically needed for this. I think we mostly just want to translate tabs to spaces, but until I see a compelling reason not to do it that way, I think it's probably a good idea to say for all of these files, don't default tabs to spaces, but do detect indentation, because that way it would turn that setting on if it needs to, right? That's probably the logic for that. That's probably why Makefile does that, although it seems like a bad plan. In addition to the syntax, we also have default settings that ensure that the translate tabs to spaces feature is disabled by default for our patches so that they will accurately represent the underlying contents of the files that they're patching. Thus, and away we go. Now there's a couple of items still in here. Now let's take just a I quit the wrong thing. That's okay. I can fix that by clicking on a file that actually exists in the appropriate locale, like this one, and clicking this. I intended to quit this instead. And let's create a new sandbox, the latest build, which is 3210. And the 3209 fixed a particular bug and caused an issue for macOS, and 3210 came out shortly thereafter to continue doing cool stuff. So 3210. Okay, start ourselves up in a stub little thing. And what was I actually going to do here? I've already forgotten what my plan was. Say tools, developer, new syntax, and OA patch, text.oa.patch. We don't actually care. And include source.diff. That's what I did in the other one, right? My diff.sublime syntax. Does it seem to like that? No. There we go. I'm the smart party. I know everything there is to know about syntaxes except how to use them and how to write them and how they work. But apart from that, I'm practically a genius. Okay, now we're going to say new plugin, and we're also going to, oh, I don't have that installed. Crunk. Well, when in doubt, my my sandboxes when they install are very minimal. Just so, well, I probably shouldn't. Do. I can't remember where I stashed that file, to be perfectly honest. Crap. Here, let's do this. That's easy enough. There. Now I got a diff. No. Also, I don't have this thing in my diffs, which maybe I should. I don't know. There we go. We take that bad out. I've already forgotten what it was I was saying before that. That has the diff syntax, right? Okay, so now we're going to say view dot set scratch true, because this is a scratch buffer for all intents and purposes. And we're going to say, just for our own edification, view dot set read only true. So now no one can fiddle it. And then we say view dot name, set name, I would imagine, diff of my file dot py. Well, I guess if I'm going to do it, I might as well go all out, right? This. So it looks like that. So if I try to save this, it wants to save it as the name of the tab, which, and it's going to give it that because this syntax actually happens to have that, which is what one would expect. And we're going to save this as, untitled.py. That's cool. And we're going to say that I should probably also install Snappy here, because otherwise I'm going to be more than a little confused in a minute. Sample listener on pre-save self view. And I guess we might say if not view.match selector 0 and source.diff return pre-save of a diff, just to say. Okay, so now I'm going to save this. I'm going to save it again. I'm going to save it again. We don't see anything happening there. If I do this, so on pre-save, maybe, and just to be sure that I haven't boned this up, we see it saying we every time that's about to happen. So on pre-save isn't going to get called until after you select the name of a file. Okay, so I was sort of curious. I couldn't remember if on pre-save happens prior to that, and we'll pick that one and see. Just before a view is saved, but just after the file name has been selected, if you will. But I can't remember what the name of the particular plugin is, so we need to do something like this. Open show, not send to trash, set unsaved view name. An event listener for when it's modified. Okay. Let's trace through what this is doing. If the file name, if it has a file name or it's loaded, then do nothing. View file name will be none for any new file. So for example, it's nothing. Just to prove. Yeah. So it's saying if this view already has a file name or it's currently loading, which is funny that that's happening on async. That happens when if you load a big file, the tab is created right away, even while the file content is loading. If you actually load a big enough file, you can see a little loading bar in the center of Sublime's window round about here as the file loads in. But realistically, you only ever see that if you, say, try to open a 3 gig file or something along those lines. Generally, it's lightning fast. If there's already setting name is false, so if it's true, return. This is a debounce for calling update the title, like so. And what does update title do? This is a debounce thing so that we can see as I type, the tab gets text. This unnotified thing happens every time the text modifies. So if you went super fast, you don't want it to. Let's go ahead and close that. You don't want this to keep triggering a whole bunch. So every time it's about to do it, it adds 1 to pending, and here it subtracts 1 from pending, and it only does something if it's 0. So it only does it at the last one after all the modified things are done. If set unsaved view name is false, return get the name auto name. Only set the name for plain text files. Okay. Is auto name a setting that the setting that I was thinking of in the other video? Let's see. If I try to save this, it says diff of my diff. View.settings.set auto name mydiff.oa patch. Well, that doesn't do anything. Assuming I did it right. And who knows if I did. So you have to trace through the rest of the code. The current name, is the auto name. The view name is the view name. Okay. There's actually a setting for that, huh? Yeah. All right. I believe that. If it wasn't set to set it, don't do it. I wonder what, that must default to being turned on. I wonder what happens in that case. I guess it's just left it untitled until something exciting happens. Current name of the file is the value of the setting auto name, which could be none, and view name is the name of the current file, which is probably unknown. Get the syntax. If it's not plain text, then if it has a name, erase that name and set the name back to being empty. I believe the magic of that is some text here. I think should change the name, but there's sometimes a weird little bug. Maybe not. Oh, there we go. Yeah, see, there's an issue with the tabs updating their name after if they've been changed. So now it's because it knows the syntax of this is Python, it's not trying to set that name anymore, and it ends up being untitled, like so. So every time you update it, check to see, remove the setting, set the name back to being empty, and return. This might be the reason why that's happening. Maybe the reason that tab takes so long to update is so that this thing here, if it wants to, can flip this name to be blank so that when you try to save the file, something exciting happens. So if we tested that, some text here, right? And then we said synpy and then saved it. Still says some text here, but it's got the correct extension now. As soon as we modify the file, though, something happens. So I guess that because it requires onModified to be invoked one more time after the syntax has been changed. That makes sense. Let's try that now. This, incidentally, if you're still watching this, is how you end up knowing more or being able to posit more about how Sublime works. There's nothing essentially written down about this, but you get curious, you make observations. Some file.txt like so, and then I decide, no, that should be a Python file. Now I changed the syntax, but I haven't done anything, so update title can't be called because onModified can't be called. So I might have to actually modify something. As soon as I do, that flips to be something else. And if I try to save, I end up as untitled.py because that's the name of the tab there. Now, if we combined that with something else, this bit here is all about setting that setting that was the auto name that was applied, because if you saved the file, then the name of the file actually changes. As you can see here, I think this should return nothing, but it would change after you save the file, and it also has a file name. The new templates plugin has a default directory setting, a default extension setting, doesn't have yeah. If we said view.settings.set default dir and say, for my purposes, my home directory, like that. If I try to save this, it does try to save it in my home directory. So that part at least works. But what we want is to change the default syntax of the file, the default extension of the file, from what that is to the other thing. So this is something that I may have tried. Await patch like this, but it's not offering that because this sort of has a name. But yeah. So the trick would be trying to detect when a save is about to happen to try to fiddle stuff, but you can always cancel out of this, and I don't think there's any way to be able to detect that particular thing. So in short of naming the tab something else, I don't think it's possible to do what I'm thinking here and somehow have these tab names look like they look and still save to the appropriate file type, unless the name was this. And then you'd end up with that. So that's, I don't know, maybe. That might be a thing to do. I don't know that I necessarily like that. So we'll leave that for the time being, I think, and maybe grab some more coffee here. Now, overall, there are a few key bits to how everything that we want to do is going to work. Let's create various things that we probably don't need currently. Those are all in there, right? Yeah. The first is a command to actually generate the patches, which is the thing that we were creating over here. But this isn't really the way to do this, because we want a command more like the diff single, where here it's going to ask us for a package, and then it's going to ask us for an override, and then something happens. That's one thing we want to do. So you can say create patch, and it asks you what package do you want to patch, what item in that package do you want the patch to be for? Here's your patch, which is essentially what this diff is, all things being equal, except there'd be an extra line at the top. But I think we're not going to implement this as diff per se, because you should also be able to do this, which is I want to create a patch for an entire package. And in that case, it just needs to ask you what package, and you pick it, and then it shows you. That's probably a bad example of that. I don't even know what an example was of one that had more than one. This, yeah. There's a TM preferences change here, and there's that one. How different is this actually? Did yeah. Let's see, that's actually something that I modified. That's one of the ones that I fixed. This diff was redonkulous before because the underlying file had tabs and I had tabs, and it was a whole bad scene, man. It was tricky. Interesting that this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. Okay, hang on a second. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. One and then a tab and then another tab. That's interesting. What did I do there? That really seems like it should have been exactly 2 tabs followed by the content, or exactly 8 spaces. So why is that extra space there? That's weird. Oh, that's derp. That has to be there because this column has to have a plus or a minus or a nothing. Okay, never mind. I'm an idiot. Anyway, we want to be able to do that. So what we want is a command that takes an argument that is a package, that takes an argument that is an override, and an argument for is package only. And if you provide the correct arguments, it'll either automatically create a patch for that package or for that override, depending on the argument you gave it and whether or not you said package only. If you don't provide it enough arguments, it's going to prompt you. So if you don't provide it with a package, it'll ask you for one, just like we see here when we do bulk diff. And if you set package only to true, as soon as you pick one, it's done. If instead you said that is package only false, then it works more like this one where you pick it and then it wants to know the file you want to patch. And if so it asks stuff, and it's just sort of it's not context sensitive, if you will. It's just a thing you can always do. And that command does the right stuff and then creates the override. The next thing we want is create override context. And that's what this all thing was, wherein we tried to determine when we're in something that can have a patch created for it because it looks like that, or we can create a patch for this file because we right clicked on it here, or we can create a patch for this entire package because we have selected it, which isn't currently a thing that thing knows how to do. Oh, sorry, it's right here. I was expecting it to be at the bottom. So we could create patch 4 and it would do a thing. And the entire purpose of the context version of the command is to just know when it's supposed to be able to do that. Like, for example, it should also work up here, right? And in the other report and in package report and stuff like that. In this file and in its diff, it should also work like so. So those are all the sorts of things that this should be able to do. The context command only needs to know if it's available or not, and then if in its run method, it just runs the command we just created, or we will have created first, to create the patch. So that's the first 2 steps. We need to be able to create a patch, and we need to have a context command to do it. That ends us up with these OA patch files like this. And all of that part is a pretty big job overall. I mean, to some degree, this part's fairly simple because, as we can see, I've already done it once. And we may be able to reuse some code there. The next thing you need is a command that knows how to apply a patch. And that one I'm not sure on. I'm thinking it's always going to be invoked from inside of a file that you have to open it. So that's an example of a command that needs to be context sensitive, but it only needs to be context sensitive to files of a particular syntax, and then it can just try to do something with it. It doesn't have to worry about the file name. Because any other method for doing that requires you to allow the user to prompt for the file that they want to use as the patch. And there's no API for us to be able to open a file open dialog. Only Sublime can do that as part of, you know, opening a file. So to do something like that, we'd have to use a quick panel, the same way that this stuff is using a quick panel. Like say we do this and we can look inside and we can even go into another folder and go back up. But we'd have to do that by gathering the contents and scanning the drive. And I mean, maybe that's good user experience, but it doesn't seem like good user experience to me. It seems like if you're gonna you open a patch, you just have one, because keep in mind this is usable as it is because it's very constrained. This is a list of packages. This is the list of files in that package. The package directory, well known. There's an API function to get it. Contents of that package, also well known. We know how to do that. Just browsing the user's file system, that's going to be, scanning everything in my home directory, going inside the fonts directory, scanning everything in there. There's probably files we don't care about. What do we do about that? Do we want to see a bunch of true type fonts in here and then say you can't open that? No, we probably want to hide them. But then the directory listing is just almost always empty. It's bad user experience. So I think for applying a patch, we want this happening here. We want to be able to just right click on it and say, yes, apply this patch, and away it goes. And applying that patch has its own sets of checks and balances. We would use this information here, as I said, to double check, is this diff for a package that's even installed? Because if it's not, there's nothing we can do, right? If it is installed, is it the right version? If it's not the right version, we can still try. It might not work. So be warned there. And if this line isn't here, then it just tries to figure that information out for here, and it can't warn you because it doesn't know the version, right? So that's its own thing. And that isn't something that should stop you from doing it anyway, which also means that if you used, a straight up diff command to somehow create one of these things, override audit should be able to apply it, assuming you can massage these paths so that it knows what it is that you're trying to do. Because it would only look at the to file, it wouldn't care about the from file. We need to do other things. If there's already an unpacked folder for this package, then we need to back that up so that if something goes wrong during the patch, it's possible to recover. If there isn't one, then if the patch fails, we need to be able to delete that out. That should be fairly simplistic, he said, making finger quotes, because something could undoubtedly go awry there. But at least if there's a zip backup, it's possible to restore things back to the way they were, even outside of Sublime if you had to. I don't want to do something that requires someone to maybe take an external action, but it's much preferable to saying, sorry. For files like this that are being added, you need to check. We think we're creating this file. Does this file already exist? Because if it does, that's probably bad. I don't think we can proceed. If you were going to delete a file, does the file already not exist? In that case, that's okay. If it does exist, its content better exactly match this. Or if you will, assuming this diff hunk applies, the file better end up being empty when we're done. Otherwise, we're in trouble. This is the only way that you can delete something as an override, by the way. You can't There's no way to remove a package file. The only thing you can do is put an empty file in its place. And for a couple of file syntaxes that or resources, that may not even be a thing that you want to do. The only other way to do that is to create a whole new Sublime package file. So this is how we would do that. So that's another thing that we have to check for there. And then we just apply this stuff. And there's one other thing we need to be aware of, and that is, and in order to do this, I think we're going to need to do this and very quickly comment this out. Okay. Now, if I come back over to here and create an override report, and I can, whoops, I picked the wrong thing. Oops, I want override report. Excuse me. Here is Sublime 3, a package which actually I haven't used nearly as much as I used to since the incremental diff popped in here. But I do like the idea of being able to do something like this and actually see side-by-side diffs. I do that from time to time. I think I've also been using this a lot for that, but here I could actually edit this in line if I wanted to, but I'm not going to. But oops, I lost in this particular package, and the reason that I have this in my settings is because Sublime 3 is a package that installs as a Sublime package file, but then extracts most of itself out into your user package. Seems like it should probably have a .no package file so that it doesn't end up as a package at all, but I'm not entirely sure why. I'm not the author. Notice there's a lot of ping files in here, or PNG files. I prefer saying PNG. Some people say ping. I'm going to say PNG from now on. I've made enough of a concession by saying JSON instead of JSON and Linux instead of Linux, because I tend to say things wrong, because I'm a bad boy. And if we diff this, you're going to see a lot of this stuff. A lot of these. File is binary. That's nice, but this could appear in an override, particularly for a theme. Themes include PNG images for, the icons of stuff, like the close icon is an X, and the folders in the sidebar, and things of that nature. So if there's a binary file in your unpacked packages folder, you want to pack that up too. But how do we do that? Try to make a base 64 encoded version of the file so that it can be in the diff. Big file, base 64 encoding only makes things bigger. It doesn't make them smaller. Doable? Perhaps. Create a base 64 encoded version of the base file, then create a base 64 version of the other file, then diff those, have the diff be a diff of two base 64 encoded things, and on the patch end, do the same thing and apply the patch and somehow convert it back to a binary file? Probably doable. Kind of a pain in the butt. So I'm saying that, and at least for now, and maybe we'll end up doing it that way I just said, until it's done, you never know what form it's going to take. My plan is to create a sidecar file. So as a part of the patch, it would, if it found any binary files, which again, it's just using the same setting that Sublime uses to know if a thing is binary, it would pack those up into a zip file, name it OA sidecar or OA patch sidecar or something like that, with the exact same name as the patch file that is created, and just put it in the same directory. And then when the patch is being applied, override audit can look and see, is there a sidecar file with the same name in the same location? And if there is, I'll extract that too. And that way you could patch up binary files. And we can even be smart about this and say, yes, there is a beeline2.png file here, but I'm checking its CRC32 value against the version from the zip file. It doesn't look like it's changed. That's not an override. We don't need to pack that one up. It should be just fine in the location that it's in. I'm thinking. I mean, we could also force all binary files to be there if there was a reason why a binary file had to be unpacked and not inside the file. I don't think that there's a reason for that. And the other thing we would have to do when we're creating the patch is detect files like this one here, which is in the package directory but isn't in the underlying package. So maybe we add that to the patch as well. If it's binary, it goes in that sidecar file. Those are the overall steps to this. Create a command that creates a patch, create a command that applies a patch, create a command that contextually allows you to apply that patch. And then there are various rules that all apply in there. And this is the stuff that we are going to be working on in the next few live streams. And I wanted to take this stream to sort of talk about that a little bit, the features, the reasonings, why it's working the way that I'm thinking it's working. I've actually spent a lot of time thinking about this and bouncing ideas off of my good pal Keith Hall, um, just to see what do we think of this? Am I missing something here? And it really seems, like it's going to be a good thing. I think the by far the hardest part of this is going to be the application of the patch. Trivially, this small bit of code will do it. But I don't think it's particularly error prone. I also have over here in this window for the Python patch thing, this particular file here, which is, a mere 1,200 lines of some code that is decidedly more complex than that few lines I just pointed out, including being able to figure out what kind of diff the thing is coming from to be able to apply various different kinds of patches, which isn't really something that we need at all. And it's got codes in here for patching up hunks. Now, one of the more complicated aspects of creating a patch is actually what happens if, and maybe we probably want to use a better thing for this. This is basically saying, here's a line of context, then this line was removed and this line was added, which is really just doing this, but unified diffs don't do intra-line changes, they do line-by-line changes. And then following that, here's this. Now, I think, and I haven't really traced through this code, but if ever there was a case for why single character variable names make your code very nice and short and less than 80 columns long and, 20 lines, but good Lord, good luck trying to figure out what the hell it's doing just by looking at it. Like, throw a comment in a thing, man. Apply a patch. Yeah, thanks. I gathered that by the fact that the function is named apply patch. Maybe throw a comment or two in here to describe what mystical, magical logic this thing is doing. Anyway, rant aside, what happens if this instruction is saying the size of the hunk and how many lines were modified in the source file versus the other file so we can find the appropriate things? This will fail if these lines don't match anymore, or these ones, I guess. Basically, if you're saying in the source file that looked like this, in the output file that looked like this is the context, these lines wrapped the change, and this is the line that changed, but in the interim, someone added a comment here after this line, technically the patch is no longer valid because there's not enough stuff there. Standard patch uses what it calls like fuzzing, where if the lines are the same, but they're not quite in the right place and they're close enough, then it can apply the patch anyway, and it'll say something like applied patch hunk 2 with fuzz to let you know that it patched it, it found a place, and it applied it. It's probably right. In a perfect world, these patches are always applied against something pristine. So our two choices here are to say, no matter what override you already have, when you apply a patch, if you don't have an override, good. If you do have an override, I'm going to back it up and I'm going to create a fresh one, and your override can go to hell. Or if you have an override, I'm going to try to apply this override on top of it, but I'm going to back it up anyway. And that would allow you to make changes and then also apply someone else's changes. And as a developer, I'm really imagining that a lot of this sort of functionality is going to be used by developers of packages, maybe to shoot things around while they're working on stuff. If they don't want to make git commits, I changed this to this. What do you think? You could easily throw it in your package and apply it, see what you think. Um, that's how you want that to work. So I think we need to worry about that whole context thing. So I think applying the patch is going to be the trickiest part of the whole thing. Creating it is going to be almost trivial in comparison, even though it's probably not a super easy task. Like I said, I've done it once before. I kind of the ins and outs of how that all works. And a part of that change might be complex because we're taking the diff code that's already available in the packages code. I'm going to put that setting back before I forget. Um, there could be a lot of code in the packages.py here that the the diff functionality is. See, this is how simple diffing is. If it's binary, say it's binary. Get the contents of the packed file, get the contents of the unpacked file, use difflib to create a unified diff, cram the results back together. It's pretty much exactly what you want. And I got some extra stuff in here so there can be like a, diff is files are unchanged or whatever. And there could maybe be some indent applied to it as well. So this part, all things told, fairly simple to pull off, to create the diff result, and the thing that injects the stuff just adds this text to a buffer. Maybe as a result of creating patches, we come up with a cleaner way to do this. Say, for example, I have to say as list equals true for both of them or something. And then the diff functionality can just piggyback on that cleanup and everything is cleaner. Who is to say? But my thought process on this, and I've been thinking about it a lot, is I was on the right track with having a command to create a patch, but I hadn't fully thought through all the implications of this. So I think what we actually want to do is, like I said, have the create patch command actually create the patch. It doesn't need any of this context crap in it. And what we really want to start with is this functionality for being able to browse if we need to, or just do the command if we don't. Because although we can write the command to create the patch, we still need a way to invoke it. And it seems like one way you could do that is to have, and I've done this before, a key binding that just invokes it for a certain thing. But once a code reaches a point where you're trying out a variety of things to see how they work out, you want to be able to do something like this and say, what happens if I pick this file? What happens if I pick this file? And we're going to need that functionality anyway, and we can pretty much piggyback on it. So I think that's what we're going to do first. Create a stub command that does that, then worry about creating the actual files that look like this. And we're going to take it as read that if we create a file like this, we'll be able to do something with it later. But creating the files is the most important thing to begin with. Once that's done, then we work on the application of this. And in that case, the command is going to be really easy because exposing the functionality for the command is going to be really easy. The command itself, like I said, is going to be the hardest part. But adding a menu entry for apply this patch, that part's going to be easy. So we're not going to worry about that per se. I opened the clone of that file there, did I? Okay, so with all of that said, and just a little bit of time left in the stream here, this is probably one of the more boring streams overall, but I'm going to maybe be able to refer to this one and just assume as we're going forward that this is the overall goal of how this is all supposed to work. create a patch, it's going to look like this. It's applied like that. These are the things we have to look out for. And we can just go ahead and go from this point and assume that everybody's caught up on that. We want, and yeah, we'll leave those in there for now. We need a command similar to bulk diff. I need to actually find where that actual command is. So let's do this. It's not a setting, obviously, and it's not a syntax. And it's probably not a resource. I would have thought something in here is modified, but it's not showing up there. Watch this, he said unknowingly. Look, these menu items are different. There's still issues with that. That's some weird business right there. This package is a symlink though, so there may be some issues with that. Although I've never really had issues with it before. As long as somewhere knows, I'm okay with that. So let's see. Diff single. Shortcut for bulk diffing a single package. If you gave a package, we're going to have to collect the package list before we can continue. So let's take a look at this. Something similar to this. Actually, yeah, diff single, right? So this is sort of an example of that. You can take a package, you can take an override, and is this a bulk diff, yes or no? If it's a bulk diff, then it's just going to choose a package wholesale. Otherwise, it's going to ask you for an override. So if you said that it should be bulk and the package isn't none, then it can just go ahead and create a report. Or in our case, it could just go ahead and actually generate the patch. Otherwise, it has to gather the list of packages, including the list of overrides, because we want to only prompt for things that have overrides in them. And when that's done, loaded is called. We get the list of packages. If we were not given a package, then we're prompting the user for one. But if we were given a package and it exists, show the overrides or say there isn't anything that can be created. And this one up here, show package list gets the list of packages with overrides, which comes from a place. It either says there's nothing with an override, so you can't create a patch, or it shows you the list of files in the package, or sorry, it shows you the list of packages, and when you pick a package, it shows you the list of overrides and then runs that diff report. So this is something very similar to what we want to do here. So let us jump that over there. And I would imagine, just to be sure, yeah, moving the tab totally unpreviewed it. So that's nice. We want a new file in here. Whoops, not that though. Add override audit source commands. What would we call this? Create patch.py, like so. And we want to import Sublime and oops. We want to do this, I think is what we want to do. I mean, we want that. We want packages with overrides. We probably don't want diff override for right now. That seems like it would be silly. We're going to want one of these bad boys. And another one down at the bottom, I would imagine, because I'm that kind of guy. And class override audit create patch command. And selectively create a patch file for either a single override. I'm gonna shorten that back to the level I normally have it at, or well, I guess kind of less. Right. Yeah, I don't need to see that part, but I do want to get closer to the edge of that. Yeah. Selectively create a patch for either a single override or all of the overrides in a package. The result of this is a file created that is a unified diff file of all overrides, potentially also including a sidecar file. Whoop. 4 binary files. And I like to write this sort of stuff because it reminds me of what it is I'm trying to do. And we would say we need a package. We need an override. And we want package only is, let's say, false. And that. Now, we need to tie this in to anything. Actually, let's do this. Actually, we can say log patch, whoops, override in package, and maybe we wrap that in singles and wrap that in singles. I can't remember how my patch function works. I think I probably, or my thing works. I think I probably want this, but I can't remember. So we'll just try this and see what happens. The first one is override. The second one is package, and we can say dialog. No. All right, I guess I'm gonna have to look at the definition anyway. Yeah, star args. This one isn't as cool as it could be. Dialog equals true. That's what we want in there. So long it's been since I've done stuff like this. Dialog equals true. So if you run this command, it'll tell you what it's trying to do. Good. Now we're going to copy that. In the commands file, we need let's do this, create override, create patch. Now all of this stuff has knock-on fiddles. Probably could have just cranked it on the end, but I'm not that kind of guy. I kind of like things to sort of make sense. So create override from dot create patch, import that command, and override commands, create override. We want, whoops, a little bit of that. That should make sure that the command is pulled out of commands into the source module where reload source.commands, and the commands that get pulled include an override audit create patch command. That makes sure that the thing gets pulled up out of the source folder into override audit.py, which just imports absolutely everything that gets exported, which from the source directory, which as we just saw is the core module, the browse module, our event listeners, and our commands. You need to do that from a top level plugin to make sure that Sublime can see them. And with that all done, if I quit and restart, no errors. So that's good. I'm going to disable TypeScript because I'm not doing anything TypeScript related. So that made that real unhappy. I'm going to quit that and I'm going to restart her up just to make sure. So we are nice and clean on things. We haven't seen any errors. So if I said window.run command override audit create patch, patch none in none. That's what we expect to see. More importantly, it actually ran the command, right? So I could say package default. And kind of expected that that was actually going to do something, since that did something. but perhaps my, oh, close that, close that, close that. Hmm. That's interesting. I wonder why it's doing that. That works, right? So why wouldn't that work? Huh. Oh, well, I'll tell you what. Um, very not a good idea that this here is here. Because it creates the exact same command. So that is bound to cause no end of whoopsie doodles. There we go. Yeah. Isn't it weird that the one way it ran it and the other way it didn't? Because this one has keyword args and I only provided one. So there's multiple classes that provide. This one's a text command and that one's a window command. That's interesting. It's also, by and large, interesting that this file still has a Python syntax, but I guess that's because that's the syntax it had before. I'm going to go ahead and close that. We can always find that in my package later. And that's the thing we're sort of modeling on. So just to double verify, we could also say override is paste from history, like so. And it says patch paste from history in default, right? Cool. So that's good. That is our command, quote unquote, implemented, right? So now what we need to do is bind that to be able to do a thing with it. And I think it's unfortunate that this stuff is already in here because it's the wrong command. So I think what we're going to do is this. We're going to find this, and we're going to make this, oh, we're going to delete this line for one thing. We're going to make this context create patch. So that one's just otherwise not going to show. And in tab context, we're going to override audit context create patch like this, because we don't want that there either. And close that. And in the main menu, we might want an item. Maybe it's even, a good idea to do something like this. So that the tools menu for override audit has things a little more diffing things, the standard reports, diffing things, refreshing one of those reports, swapping the diff thing. So we got that, and there's an extra line in here. So we might say create patch, create package patch, which it would be override audit, create patch, and the args would be only package only true, like this. And we'll go ahead and jump that out like this and fix that. That's how we're doing that here, right? Yeah, okay. So we could go up to the tools menu and pick override audit, create package, and that's dense. Patch. Shoosh. Create package, patch. And create patch none in none. Oh, actually, I think we should probably also throw in package only, just so we can verify when this stuff happens. Oh, we don't need to do that because we picked this. So if we said create package patch, true, yes, we want this to be a package only. That's what we want. And duplicate that, create override patch, and package only will explicitly set to false, even though that's the default, just to make sure. And could we create one that says create all packages patch? Yes. I don't think that there's a good reason to want to do that. If you really did want to do that, you could create multiple files and merge them yourself. I can't see a reason why you would want to create a patch that patches multiple packages on a regular, or not necessarily multiple packages, but every package. Maybe some UX could be created for selecting specific ones. So you could say, yes, I want to create an override for the Python package, and I want to create an override for Terminus because I've fiddled with both of those things to work together to make the world's greatest Sublime REPL, and I want to distribute that to someone. That seems like perhaps something that might be useful, but that's a bit down the line. I don't know what a good a good way to convey that information is, short of just constantly popping the same quick panel up over and over again, allowing you to pick items and shuffling them around in the list. Or there's no good way to do that, is what I'm saying. So now if I go up to here, because we made that change, if we create override patch, none false. Now that text could be better. Perhaps. That's going to put it in the menu there, and I'm going to copy both of these things. Whoops, sorry, I'm going to copy both of these things. And in this file, we are we can just put these anywhere, really, but we did have this sort of in this area. So we might throw that here. I guess what we would actually do is, yeah, we could just create our own here, I would imagine. So the caption would be override audit create patch package. And the args for that would be package only true. And am I doing anything with args? Yeah, and they're all on one line like this, and they don't have that trailing. And then we copy that and plunk it here. Like this. Remove those lines because we don't care about them. And here is create patch file. Do I see Oh, I guess if I had the actual command in there, that would work a little better, wouldn't it? Yeah, I forgot something. And it was create patch like this. I always guess wrong what order that's going to be. Okay, and we need to go to my, oops, no, this one. User default commands, and zoop this one out because it's not something that we're doing there anymore. Create patch, package, create patch, single file. So if we do that, single file, yeah. Smart party, save the file. Patch for single file, it's false. Patch for a package, it's true. Good. So we have connected our command to the main locations where it's going to get invoked. Remember, context version of that comes later and invokes this command with the correct arguments. And we don't want to fiddle with that right now because, well, we have sort of example code for how to do that on the other side, and it would only have to invoke this with appropriate commands. So maybe it's an idea to do that now and just sort of have that out of the way for testing purposes. What the heck? Context create override, we would do the exact same thing as we did here, right? Because all of this is doing, as we can see, is sort of figuring out what to do and then doing it. So here's where we would say view package file. This is the stuff that we were working on previously. I needed the context helper because it's a text command. It has to be a text command, as we discovered previously, or it does not work for beans. So let's save as that, and we're going to call it context create patch in the commands file. And we got a context create patch command. And I mean, we zoop all that. We'll, check this out and see how we're all working and paste it all in. Man, there's a lot of stuff in here. Paste that like so. Just as an initial implementation. I mean, let's not go crazy here. From .core import. Let's say do we actually need any of that stuff? No, because we're going to have the information that we need. We just need this one. So we can remove that. And that's all we need to get this working. We also don't need this, I would imagine. But we'll find out in a moment, won't we? We can, because I copied that over here, we can delete this file now. And I do not care about it any further. I think that means because I modified the other menus, the tab menu to context create patch, which maybe I'll move up over here now. And clean that up. So that's the tab context. And in this context, maybe we don't even want that to be separate. Well, for which one did I just have open? This one. You can either create an override or you can create a patch. You probably can't do both, right? Because if you try to right click on something that wasn't something you can create an override out of, you're almost certainly not going to be able to create a patch on it either. Or create override only works on certain files that can be promoted. Create patch could work on a file that's already an override along with those other commands. So that seems like the right way to do that. And for the regular context menu, I would imagine the same is true, but you can also edit the file. So I think it's a good idea for in this case to have it bumped down to that locale like so. And I think this would take arguments like, oh, it needs to figure it on its own, doesn't it? Yeah. Let's do that. So let's see. Based on context, determine if the information at the cursor or for the current file tab is something that can have a patch created for it. This includes the names of packages and overrides, whoa, in reports, as well as inside of overrides and their diffs. Although a diff is technically is pretty much a patch anyway. Don't see any particular harm in it, so it's going to say create patch. So how do we figure out when the command is enabled? We get the context of the current view. Get the report type. So get the report type. This is a package diff if the report type doesn't start with colon, otherwise false. And that's because, as we saw in the previous thing, report type is a setting that override audit applies to all of its reports, and a package report and an override report and an expired override report all have report names that are unique but start with a colon, and a bulk diff of a single package has a report type that's the name of the package. A bulk diff of all packages has a report name that starts with a colon. So using that, you could see if the current thing you're clicking on is a report of some sort. So is package diff is true if the report type doesn't start with a colon, otherwise it's false. So if the current context has a target, which means it has an override and it has a package, or it's a package only one, which would mean that it was something that was the name of a package that you right clicked on in a report, or is package diff, which means that it's a report, but it's a report that's a single bulk diff override, then this is enabled. And if we want to know if this command is visible, if it's told to always be visible, then yes. Otherwise, it calls it is enabled to see, so that this is what makes override audit commands disappear out of the menu when they're not present otherwise. And here the stub is create context. We basically do the same thing that we did for is enabled to be able to get the description, which is a bit of a bummer. But we need to know stuff, and we're going to need to know it a third time, so we're probably going to want to extrapolate this out somehow. But we need to see what the final version takes. So if this has a context, has a target, which means it's a full override or a diff of an override, then it's going to say create a patch for the name of the package and the name of the override. If it's package only or it's a package diff, then it's going to say create patch for default. Otherwise, it just says create patch, and that's only going to happen if the command doesn't currently apply, but it should be made visible. It'll just say create patch, but it doesn't know what it's supposed to create a patch for, and you can't pick it anyway. And lastly, we need to do this. Okay, now we need to say that package is equal to, how do we want to say this, is the thing. What we're going to say is package is equal to something, right? And we're going to say override is equal to something. We need to know if this is package only, right? So we're going to say if ctx dot, well, we need to know the name of the package. We need to know the name of the override. If ctx dot package only or is package diff, then this is a package only. Else package and override, right? And the difference between that is what the last value of the argument is supposed to be. So we could say we need to know what the package is going to be. And the package is going to be context.package. Oh, sorry. It's going to be R type if is package diff, else context.package. Is that the, I think, let's see. Command context has a property named package. So I would imagine, yeah, it's not a method. So it might be none. Package only returns that if package isn't none and override is, and has target requires package and override to both not be none. And override is a thing that could be there or none. So package is the report type if it is a package diff, else context.package. So if this is a package diff, then it's a package diff. It's definitely got the name of a package and it's the name of the report. And otherwise, it's context.package, which could conceivably be none if this is an override. No, I guess it couldn't. If it wasn't an override, there's always going to be a package, right? So that's going to be good. And then we're going to say override is equal to, well, context.override, right? Which could be none. So we probably don't need to do that. This part is part that we might need. And package only is equal to context package, whoops, only, or is package diff. Okay. Now what we actually want to do is say self.view.window.run command override audit create patch, and with the args, is there a way for it to pop that out? No, huh? Okay. I'm not sure. But package would be R type if is package diff, else context package, and override is context.override, which could conceivably be none, which is fine, and package only, which I believe is what we called that thing. Yeah. Package only is equal to this, which I'm going to copy because I don't want to type it all out. And then we don't actually need this stuff. We did need to know that. We don't need to know any of this, but that conceivably would run the command. We need to copy that. We need to find the commands thing, and where we say create patch, we need to say from dot create context create patch import the override audit context create patch command. And here we need to do the same thing. That boosts it from the commands file up into the source directory, where we need to also inject it from there, which is going to pull it into override audit. I'm going to quit. I'm going to restart Sublime. We're not seeing any errors, so that's good. So over here, this should do nothing, right? Because it's not an override. That would make sense. We're going to close these because I think those are probably done. I mean, there may be issues, but that's not one of them. Let's create a package report. In a package report, clicking up here does nothing. If I right-click on a package, I can create patch for default. And if I pick it, function object has no attribute run command. Fuchi doodle. There we go. Try that again. Do that far too often. Create patch for default. Create patch, no override in default, and it's package only. Perfect. That's exactly what we want. Pre-create an override report. If I right click on default, I can create patch for default and patch none in default, and it's a package report. If I did it for a makefile, just to make sure it's not a fluke, patch for none in makefile. Now, if I pick a file here, it has create patch for. Now, this should probably be located in a different locale, but nevertheless, create patch for default slash paste from history. I guess in this case, we don't want the name of the package. We want because we're not doing it anywhere else. So that's something that we can easily fix. If I pick it, it's patching paste from history in default, and it's not a package only. So we want just that one thing. Let's go ahead and I guess in this case, this code could be somewhat cleaned up because what we're putting there the message is the same. It's only this that's changing, but that's neither here nor there for the time being. So that is create patch for comments.tm preferences in AppleScript. So that is working the way we want. And I would imagine if we created an expired only one, there's not a lot different there. In fact, we can't even do that right now, but I'm willing to bet that that's going to work the same. For our purposes, I'm going to bulk diff all packages because there's no real difference between either of these. And here I should be able to create a patch for default, and it's got the default package, no override, and it's a package only one. So it has enough information to do exactly what it wants to. And if I did it this way, I can create a patch for paste from history in the default package, not a package only one, so it's only going to patch up the one, and that means that part is good. And the last thing we might want to do is edit this override, because from inside this override, we should be able to create a patch for paste from history in default. It's not package only. Even if this has the focus, if I right click over here, that's still the case. If this has the focus and I right click on the tab, we can create a patch for this before anything else, and it'll paste from history in default false. If I was to open a diff for this, which is our new override diff patch, thusly, then in the file, create patch for, paste from history in default false, and up here, create patch for, paste from history in default false. And I guess one thing I did not check there, but I should have, if I bulk diffed a single package, say default, from inside this thing, this file as a whole, I can create a patch for default because this is a bulk diff report for a specific package. So anywhere in here, it can happen, which I think is what we want. And it also works on the tab, none in default package only, none in default package only. And even if this has the focus and I did it on the tab over here, it's still none for default package only. So that's the finger quotes easiest part of this whole operation. These are all of the files that give us, as a matter of fact, context create patch, it's done now. I mean, we might want to tighten this code up a little bit for this. Like the result we have there might be context override if has target, else this if not. Um, if context diff has target or package only or is diff, then do this, otherwise do that. Yeah, that's something we can do. That's easy, but otherwise this is done. It's putting itself in the menu, it's hiding itself when it's not supposed to be there. It knows if it's supposed to be enabled or not. If it is enabled, when you run it, it runs it with the arguments to our command, assuming that if you gave it a package and said package only true, it has all the information it needs and it just creates the patch. If you gave it a package and an override and said package only true, it's still just going to create a diff for a package. If you pass it with package and override and package only false, It still knows what to do. It knows exactly what override and what package the patch needs to happen for. All of that works exactly the way we want. This command, on the other hand, is the one where we can assume we've been invoked, we can do something. So what we need to do with this is that functionality where we actually, if we have the right information, we do something with it. Otherwise, we need to prompt the user to figure out exactly what it is it's supposed to be. And as a part of that prompting, it invokes itself. Basically, what would happen here is if you pass it, if you evoke it exactly the way it is, it has no package, it has no override. It gathers the list of packages, it asks you to pick one. Once you pick one, it asks you for an override. If you pick one, then it invokes itself and uses the package and the override that you picked. And in that invocation, it has all the information it needs. The patch is created. Or if you give it a package and package only is, and no override and package only is false, then it knows the package. It only asks you for the override that you need to do from inside that package. All that stuff, done it before. It might be done before the next stream. We might do that in next stream. But what we can focus on at this point is this actual create patch command and its actual ability to create those patch files that we want. And all the rest of the integration for that command is already done. Once we've done that, we can work on applying the patches, which is probably the bear of this operation, particularly in that whole what to do when a patch goes south. But that's going to be all we have for this slightly longer than usual by about 15 minutes or so. Live stream for tonight. If you have been, thank you so much for watching. This, I think, is going to be an exciting new feature. I can't guess how many streams this might take. So I'm guessing running through to the beginning of December of this year when the Devember project starts, this is probably what we're going to be working on unless we reach an impasse or decide to work on something else. We also need to decide for the daily streams that we're going to do in November if I'm going to do that again this year. And I'm thinking I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it slightly smarter than I did last time. I'm going to have the blog set up in case I get horribly sick last year. We need an idea for something Sublime related to do as a project. So if you have any ideas about that, you can drop those down in that comment section below this video. And you can also shoot them to me on Twitter at OdatNurd. And do that also if you have suggestions for other Sublime Text topics you'd like me to cover in videos on my alternate channel or on live streams in this channel. We can easily jump away from Override Audit to answer your questions in a live stream. And if that's something you're interested in, feel free to jump on into the chat in the live stream and ask your questions there. I'm always happy to get away from whatever horrible problem I'm working on. And if I can help you work through a problem, I might know the answer to the question, we might be able to work through and see exactly how to solve or do a particular thing. But that's all we're going to have for tonight's live stream. So thank you so much. We'll see you next week on Tuesday on September the whatever that day is. I don't have a calendar handy unless life conspires. And I don't think life is going to conspire. I think we have vacation time upcoming, but it doesn't fall into Tuesday. So I think we're going to be okay on that route. And until that next live stream, this is OdatNurd, your friendly Sublime Text fanatic, asking you out there in Sublime Text land to please have a sublime day.